the city and the territory have made a lot of talk about how they want to find ways to decarbonize and reduce their economic harms and things like that. But we're still sort of continuing these same sort of patterns that are leading people to think that the only viable option for travel around the city is to use a car.
Right. Yeah.
I like how you often coin the term it's overkill.
Yeah, it's overkill.
Right. Typically you said 8 kilometers, but typically your distances are 2 kilometers or a kilometer to get somewhere. But the default is get in my car, go do the thing and come back again. And it can change if we only had the proper infrastructure.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Active Towns channel. My name is John Simmerman, and that is Adam and Becca Denley from Yellowknife up in the Northwest Territories of Canada. We are going to be talking about their initiative to get more people riding more often way up there in the Great White North. Let's get right to it with Adam and Becca. Becca and Adam, thank you so much for joining me on the Active Towns podcast.
Hey, John.
Thanks for having us.
I love giving my guests just an opportunity to introduce themselves. So who the heck is Becca and Adam?
Well, I guess I'll start with Becca. So my name's Becca Denley, and I live in Yellowknife, Northwest Territories, and I'm the program creator of ShiftNWT, which is a bike share program that we started up this past summer. And I'm an architect by trade.
Ah, okay.
Yeah,
Adam.
I'm Adam. I'm a bush pilot by profession, which means that I sort of specialize in flying to places that don't have runways. So on floats in the summer and on skis in the winter and on big balloon tires at other times. And we both got involved in this bike advocacy space after I took a job in Denmark for just a little under 3 years. And saw what they've done with their infrastructure over there, and then we became kind of annoyed that we didn't have that over here. So we've become active in that space.
That's fascinating. Yeah, it's amazing how many stories include like a trip somewhere else. You mentioned Denmark, or some people say, "Oh, yeah, I had an opportunity to do like an exchange program in the Netherlands, or we visited there, and it had a major influence and impact on it." What was it about being in Denmark that really just kind of said, "Wait a minute, we could do this in Yellowknife as well"? And oh, by the way, let's pull this up. You're way back up there.
There you are. Oh my gosh.
You see where I am, way down here. I'm almost as far south as you can get. It's pretty far down there. But I was like, wait a minute, Yellowknife. Where is Yellowknife? OMG. Yep. That is amazing. There you are.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, we kind of realized that like my daily commute while we were in Denmark was about 30 minutes by bike. We lived sort of at the top of a hill, so it was kind of 20 minutes on the way to work and 30 minutes on the way back. And that amounted to, I can't remember if it was 5 or 8 kilometers.
I think about 8.
It might have been 8, yeah. Well, the entire city of Yellowknife is only about 8 kilometers from sort of stem to stern. So we figured if I can do that, if I can easily make that commute there, why can't we do it in the city? And I had spent time biking before in Yellowknife, and I found the whole thing frustrating. And I thought, okay, so obviously the problem's not the bike, right? So what is the problem?
Right.
And we just kind of figured there's really no reason that we shouldn't be able to live the same lifestyle when we come back to Yellowknife.
Yeah. And I guess my question is, since the distances are relatively small within the village, within the city, 8 kilometers, what is the problem? You just mentioned it.
Infrastructure. That's the base of it. There's a lot, as you can see from this photo. This is from the critical mass bike ride that we did in April on Earth Day. 110 of us, I think, about that, rode our bikes across town. And I mean, to get from the 2 locations, it was about 3 kilometers. Yeah. It was an enjoyable ride. You can see we're all bundled up. There was still snow on the ground at this point. So cold is never the issue with biking. You can always dress for the weather. The issue is, where do we bike? You see little kids here. Of course, this is a critical mass bike ride. Everyone's out together. So we took up a whole lane of driving, a whole car lane, if you will. And we had a great time biking to City Hall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, like most cities in North America, we have kind of unnecessarily wide roads, which should give space for a cyclist. But first of all, it's still unpleasant because there's traffic maneuvering around you. But also in the winter, the snow maintenance, which we can expand on later, is pretty poor. So that available space really shrinks. And then they don't salt the roads up here. They just lay down grit, because for a lot of the winter, it's sort of too cold for salt to work anyways. But what that means is that in the spring, there's a lot of gravel and dust in the air that tends to persist for a long time before enough. They wait until the last snowfall is finished before they actually clean it up. So in the meantime, the edges of the roads are all full of gravel and dust, and you can feel it in your teeth, and it's a problem for people who have respiratory condition. Mm. So there are big stretches where traveling by bike is unpleasant, just because of the road conditions available to us.
We also have very, very large trucks here,
well, yeah.
And lots of them. So riding in the summertime, we like to ride on the street. You do it on the street all winter as well. But it's quite scary being out there. So when I ask other parents, like, why aren't you biking your kids to school? They look at me like I'm crazy because they're too afraid. And we want to change that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you sure do. You do want to change that. And here's a little snapshot of the Healthy Choices Award going to you, Becca, to try to help decrease some of those barriers. Talk a little bit about this.
Yeah, it's a great program, the Healthy Choices Fund from the government of the Northwest Territories. And they're looking for programs that get people active. And well, we wanted to create a program that allowed people to test out different types of bikes, because now we have e-bikes, we have cargo bikes. We saw a lot of those in Denmark, and they're amazing, and they're game changers in getting around. So we put together a program that has upright city bikes, e-bikes, e-cargo bikes, and e-trikes, because maybe you have issues with balance, but you really want to try changing how you get around in your everyday. And that was the key point of this program, is not providing people with a way to just borrow a bike for a day. It was really about creating an opportunity for someone to borrow a bike for 2 weeks at a time. So people come on the day that they pick up their bike. We introduce how to take care of your bike, the locking system, if you're new to an e-bike, how to use it, how to charge your battery. And then for 2 weeks, people bring that bike home and use it as their main form of transportation. And we found that the program was quite a success. People love being able to get their kids in a cargo bike and go do drop off in the morning. Was so much fun. So that was the one that was booked up all the time. We had a wait list, and many people couldn't get on the program this summer. So next summer we hope to run it again.
Yeah, and you mentioned winter. And the great thing about spending time in Denmark is, especially if you're there in the colder winter months, you get to experience winter, and you get to experience the fact that people ride there all year round, regardless of the weather. And it also reminds me too, this image here reminds me of Oulu, Finland, which I would say is one of the great winter cycling capitals that we have worldwide. And it also provides, I think, an interesting reframing of how cities, remote cities, and cities in colder areas can actually find a path forward, pardon the pun, a path forward. And they actually they're very suburban in context there in Oulu, Finland, and they use an entire network of pathways and trails that get people riding and walking away from the motor vehicles.
Yeah, and they're not doing anything surprising there, right? Like,
yeah.
All they're doing is they have strict standards in place, and they contract out the snow clearing, and the contractors have big incentives to make sure that they abide by the standards, and big penalties if they don't. So that's it. There's no sort of surprising secret. This photo is taken on. There's a trail called the Frame Lake Trail. The Frame Lake is kind of the lake at the center of the city, and there's a big multi-use trail that follows one side of the lake, and it connects you from the downtown to sort of the end of town where we live. And this year it's been really nicely, reliably cleared of snow. I mean, it's not the folks in Oulu, I'm sure wouldn't be satisfied, but for us, it's excellent. It's totally usable, and it's been reliable. So it's funny, like the problem for us is actually getting onto the multi-use trail because the sidewalks and the roads and the intersections approaching it are a hazard and a challenge. And then once you get on the trail, it's you're on easy street. And all last winter, I rode my bike pretty well all winter. We only arrived back in North America in December of last year. And when I came back, I learned that my driver's license had expired, so I had to kind of start all over again. For about a month, I could only drive if Becca was there to supervise me because her license had not expired. So I rode my bike to work all the time, and the coldest I think I ever rode it was about minus 36 Celsius, which is, I don't know, minus 30 or so Fahrenheit. I was shocked to find out that the problem wasn't me. The problem was that, the grease on all the bike components starts to kind of harden up. My personal comfort was not the issue. And so the issue becomes the availability of safe transit corridors.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, when I interviewed Pekka Takola there in Oulu, we talked a little bit about the fact that it's not this battle that they do to try to remove all the snow as much as ensuring that conditions are cold enough so that they can condition the snow. And so their equipment is a little different. It's not scraping it all off all the time, continually doing a battle. It's conditioning it, kind of giving it a texture and making it grippy so that people can ride. And of course, the kids just ride at incredible rates. Like 70 to 80% of the kids ride to school because the schools are on the network of separated multi-use pathways like we have here on screen right now. And then, the snow is cold enough and grippy enough. The question I have for you, since you're here in North America, way up in North America, is global warming and climate change kind of messing with the fact that you're getting a constant thaw and freeze cycle?
Yeah, it's definitely an issue up here. And we tend to get snow in October. That's when it first lands. This picture here was taken around October 20th, I believe. But shortly thereafter, all this snow that had landed on that one night was so wet and thick and hard to get through. And then it stayed there because the way that we do snow removal is also let it sit for a while because it's supposed to be so cold. You let it sit, it sort of builds up this base layer, and you drive on top of it, which we're finding is not working anymore because of the change in temperatures. So now we're seeing fluctuating temperatures that mean that there is warmer times, and then the snow is harder to get through, and then it gets cold, and then it's frozen in strange formations. And the biggest issue we see is that people with mobility issues are getting stranded, and they're staying at home for weeks at a time because there's not enough clearing, and there's no accessibility for them.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point, because when you think of people with mobility issues and the propensity for slips and falls, it's a whole nother ball game between having really cold temperatures and having really grippy sort of a crunchy snow. We had mentioned before we hit the record button that some of the videos are just, the sound of it is just sort of like that dry crunchiness underneath the tires and all that. That's much different than when you do see the variability in temperatures and you have a freeze overnight when it got kind of wet and slushy during the day. You wake up to kind of a black ice sort of feel, and it's really easy to lose your footing and slip, and especially with somebody with mobility issues, the elderly. To your point, Becca, you can feel like you're a prisoner at home because the conditions are so slippery out there.
And usually, so we lived in Yellowknife for about 13 years. We moved away for 3, and then we've just come back. And historically, what happens is that somewhere around October, the temperature takes a big dive, and then we sort of very quickly get to temperatures around -15, -12, 20, that's around 0 degrees Fahrenheit, and then it gets colder from there. But over the course of the winter, it stays for long stretches somewhere between -20 and -40 degrees. The last couple of winters, and I mean, it sounds horrifying, but it's actually it's great. That's sort of what we're accustomed to, and we rely on it because we have things like we build ice roads and things like that, so we rely on those cold temperatures. But for the past couple of winters, we've had problems with freezing rain, and that's not a phenomenon that is historic to this area. So, and then you want to talk about difficulty with mobility, like that's a huge problem. And this is a new phenomenon that we've only noticed in the past couple of winters, but it happened last December and it's happened again this December. So this is a kind of a new reality that we're laboring under.
Yeah, I like to, it goes by many different names, whether you want to call it global warming or climate change or global weirding. It's like, it was, we had a massive blizzard here in Austin when the polar vortex, dropped all the way down because the jet stream was such that we're starting to see, just really weird types of weather events that happen because the prevailing jet streams aren't what they, had been for hundreds of years, et cetera. And so, we'll get plunged into, I think it was like 8 days a week of, below freezing. And, in Austin, Texas, we can't necessarily handle 8 to 10 inches of snow. And everybody lost power. So we're without power for an entire week. So imagine going through, a really cold event like you're used to, but also trying to do that with no power and no heating. And it's like, oh yeah, I can kind of see that we're camping here a little bit. But getting away from weather report, I want to focus in on the fact that, so yeah, you guys, you go off and you do your thing a little bit, and then you come back to Yellowknife and you get motivated to make a change. And so you shift gears a bit and you're like, okay, we're ready to make a shift here. Yellowknife, are you? Talk a little bit about the website here and what y'all are trying to do and how you're being received by some of your friends, family, and acquaintances there in Yellowknife.
Well, I mean, when we knew before we'd even left Denmark that this was going to be our project. That we were working on, and Becca and I would sort of talk about like what is it that is preventing people from taking up this kind of active mobility lifestyle, and this was Becca's grand idea. So,
take it away, Becca.
All right. Yeah, part of the original concept was how can we get funding to help people have access to cool bikes that they can ride around Yellowknife in, but how can we also use that funding to maybe create temporary bike lanes and make some change in how the streets are set up? And we quickly realized through our advocacy in the city and presenting to city council about, okay, you need to do some temporary bike lanes over here. We're not able to get to the Frame Lake Trail very easily. People are afraid of biking. And all of that conversation seemed like we weren't getting anywhere. And so you have to step back a bit and think, okay, how do we start out? And so the program became just about getting people, giving accessibility to people to have a bike, be able to choose biking in their everyday, and test it out, because some people were on the fence about whether or not they wanted to buy an e-bike, and some people had never even heard of a cargo bike up here. So this is a very new model in Yellowknife, being able to put your kids or all of your groceries in a cargo bike and use that instead of a minivan to get around. So,
and we were trying to think of what are the excuses that people would give. Like if we were, I mean, not that we're these kind of people, but if we were the kind of person to say like, why aren't you riding your bike? What are the excuses people would give? We thought, well, I have a bike, but it's not comfortable. So we made sure that we had like a city bike available. One of these ones with a step-through frame, with a very upright, sort of relaxed seating posture, not sort of a leaning over the handlebars like like a racing bike. We thought, well, that's one. Okay, what about, I don't like showing up to work all sweaty. I'm out of shape. Okay, so we got the same style of city bike, but with an electric motor. And it's just the pedal assist motors. They don't have a throttle. So the idea is that you still have to be pedaling, but you get to choose, how much pedaling you need to do. And then we thought, okay, well, another complaint might be that I'm, getting a little older and I'm concerned about my balance and I'm not super comfortable. And so we thought, okay, well, let's make sure we have tricycles available. Right. And again, if someone has limited mobility, then they also, might want an electric assist. So those ones are also have electric motors. And then we thought, well, I'd like to use a bike, but I have to drop my kids off at daycare in the morning. So we thought, well, then let's make sure that we have cargo bikes available. And then by that point, we figured we'd kind of covered all the bases. So we used that to launch the program. But we figured we wanted to have a kind of bike available for whatever a person's circumstance might be, so that they could try it out and see if they had the right equipment, see if it was something that would help them in their lives.
And we coach them a bit on how, where do we go around on city streets, and where are the multi-use trails that you can use, because some of them didn't even know where the multi-use trails are, because there's not a lot of signage in town telling people that, oh no, this isn't a sidewalk, it's actually where you can ride your bike as well. So there was a lot of education involved in introducing the people to the bikes as well. And it really, the response was very positive. A lot of people were interested in trying the bikes. I have a pretty cool story, actually. One of my colleagues that I work with in my normal day job when I'm not doing all this fun advocacy stuff, and she's like, oh yeah, I'd really like to try one of those bikes. And so she signed up for the program. She lasted 3 days, started looking at ordering her own e-bike, told me on the 4th day, I'm not going to need your bike tomorrow. I bought a new bike. And by day 5, she had bought her new bike, which was an exact replica of the bikes that we were using, with the basket, with the everything, all the hoops and whistles. And so I was able to pass that borrowed bike onto another person so that they could try it for the remainder of her 2-week session. So she then had her own e-bike. It was pretty incredible. But she had thought about biking as a sport. And she used to like biking, and she was thinking, well, I can't do the biking anymore. That's a sport. But she hadn't realized that it can also be a form of transportation. And to Adam and I, biking is not a sport. It is totally an extension of our legs to get us to where we need to go. And it's so surprising how many people just don't make that connection yet. So now we have a lot of people that have tried the Shift program that have now realized, oh, this is a part of transportation. We don't have to go by car all the time.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I think that it also kind of points back to the experience in Denmark too, where to get on a bike is just like you had said, it's an extension of your feet. It's like pedestrian-plus, as Chris Bruntlett likes to say. And so there's a pragmatic sort of thought to it is, yeah, I mean, this is just a mobility tool for us, but it's really not the fault of society to be able to believe that it's something else, because we've been so scripted and framed that, bikes are two things, kind of here in North America, traditionally over the last 50, 60, 70, 80 years is it's toys for kids, and it's a racing thing. It's a sport. And so realizing the pragmatism of being able to use a bike for a short trip, and here's an overview of the city from above. If your distances are not that great, I mean, you mentioned it earlier, Adam, this is not a huge place. It's just a matter of, so the distances are very bikeable, but we just need to work on that environment and that infrastructure so that it's perceived as being safe and inviting for people of all ages and abilities to not have to dress for battle, just dress for the weather conditions and your destination and go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're right. And there's nothing about the streetscape up here as it currently stands that is indicates that a bike is part of the road network, right? Like if you're biking, you're sort of shouldering in space that is meant to be designed for cars. So you're right. There's nothing about the environment that encourages people to give it a try. So, and I mean, even we have a network of multi-use paths. They're not super well connected, but we do have them. But there's no signage, right? So a person who's walking down it might just look like a sidewalk, and a person walking down the sidewalk will see an adult coming on a bicycle and wonder why they're on the sidewalk and why they're not on the road, because there's no signage to welcome cyclists onto that space. I mean, I'm hesitant to say cyclists because
that conjures up an image.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like, I don't consider myself a cyclist. I never cycle for recreation. I don't do it. I don't go for a bike ride around the block. I go for a bike ride to work, to the grocery store, to whatever. I run errands on my bike. I don't do it for fun, but it is fun, right? Like I don't need to go cycling recreationally because I've already had my fun.
Yeah.
So Becca, you're wearing a special shirt there from Tom Flood.
I am. Yeah, I'm just gonna show it to the camera a little bit. There you go.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Yes, thanks, Tom. Tom's been on the podcast twice now, and that shirt especially is one that sort of tells his life story, is that he just wanted to be able to walk or bike with his kids to school or to other places, and became radicalized as an activist. And for him, that was truly extraordinary in the sense that, his previous career as an advertising agency guy was working in the automobile industry. And so it was really a huge shift for him. You're wearing that shirt for a reason. Tell us why.
Yeah. Well, it happened to us too. We did not expect this at all. We did not expect that we would become these advocates, but we're living it. And I mean, it started about a year before we knew we were coming back to Canada, and we were preparing ourselves mentally. And our kids, who are amazing, they in Denmark were able to go around on their bikes on their own with so much autonomy to go to swimming lessons, to go to their school on a bike or walking, but we didn't have to worry about them. They were on these nice dedicated bike lanes and multi-use paths, and we were worried about what was going to happen when we came back to Yellowknife. We thought to ourselves, okay, how are we going to get the girls to school? How are they going to get to all their activities? Are we going to have to drive them around everywhere? Because that's what people do here. They are basically glorified taxi drivers. Yeah. Oh, there's a great picture of them when we, probably in our first year in Denmark on a beautiful multi-use path. And wow, you look into their eyes after they realize that they can do this on their own. And here their ages are probably like 5 and 7, I would expect. Now they're 9 and 11, and they have great independence even here in Yellowknife. So that's fantastic.
And the other thing is having that, being comfortable with their safety as they would travel around their community, that totally unburdened us. Right, we didn't have to be chauffeuring them all over the place or supervising them everywhere we went. We could send them out the door off to their swimming lessons and know that they'd be perfectly safe all the way there and all the way back. And then we regained all that time for ourselves. So like it's not just a benefit for the children, though it absolutely is. It was a great benefit for us as well.
Yeah, so this T-shirt, I had to get it. We've spent so much time at City Hall presenting reasons why we need better infrastructure in town. We want complete streets. We want environments where people feel welcome to just be, and we have great opportunity to do that here. It just might take a long time. So we spent a lot of time at City Hall. So
yeah, and. You mentioned a couple of different things there that I want to kind of hone in on. And one, I want to pull this photo here of this crossing. You call this a safe crossing here at this location. Walk us through why you wanted to share this image, and then I'm going to make an observation.
Yeah, do you want to talk about this?
So the big summer event in Yellowknife is a music festival called Folk on the Rocks. It's been running since probably the 70s, I think. And it's not just folk music, it's all kinds of music. And it goes over the course of a weekend. And it's an incredible amount of fun. They have a site sort of right on the lake. It's all outdoors. You get incredibly sandy. You have a wonderful time. There's good food and vendors and things like that. But it's just a little bit outside of town. And to get to there, you have to travel down the highway. It's not a big highway. It's one lane in either direction. But it's still, highway speeds, and the parking at the facility is very limited, which means that people end up just kind of parking down the side of the highway. And so they encroach a little bit on the driving lane, but everyone is okay with it because it's Folk on the Rocks, right? It's the one big weekend a year. But we realized that if you wanted to bike there, and we did, you can't do it because there's all these cars that are already pushing into the driving lane. If you want to stay out of the door zone, you've got to be really well into the driving lane, and then you're really, really in the way of the highway traffic. And so we petitioned the territorial government to put up a temporary bike lane, and all we asked them to do was put up pylons along the shoulder, the painted shoulders, so that people couldn't park there, because we figured if there are not parked cars, there's sort of just enough room to have a bike lane on that space. And they agreed, and they also put in basically like an on-demand pedestrian crossing there. So they mounted these temporary posts. You push a button, the lights flash, and then you can get across the highway. So as actual safe infrastructure goes, it's pretty weak, but it was a huge benefit to the people using that space. And it helped us get sort of safely across the highway so that we could get onto that little bike lane marked off by cones, and it made an incredible difference. There was a ton of people that cycled out there. All the bike racks were full. We had to go to a local store and borrow their bike racks so that there would be enough facilities for everyone. And there was no great inconvenience with parking. People found other places to park without much concern. And something that was noticed after the fact, just kind of anecdotally, is that the traffic flow out of the festival grounds at the end of the day, the traffic flow was smoother, because you didn't have this mess of people getting to their cars and then having to do a big 180 in the middle of the highway. And the getting out of the facility was way faster and easier, because we'd removed this ad hoc parking space. Incredible.
Yeah. I wanted to hone in on that and kind of point out too that in these sorts of rural environments where you kind of have to deal with what you've been dealt in terms of the cards that you've been dealt, you do have a situation where, this sort of shoulder, unprotected, et cetera, but at the same time, you can see that, hey, we've got some space. But the other thing that it comes to mind too is, and we talked about this earlier, is that necessity to, kind of figure out a way to share some space. And so if the only space that you have available that's safe to you is, and perceived as being safe for all ages and abilities, is sharing space with pedestrians, so be it. And then you need to like make sure that everybody is kind of on the same page in terms of what's appropriate behavior. And that's what we see when we see, multi-use paths and people being able to share space in an environment, like we have in this, photograph here, is that, you're not going to be on a racing bike and traveling at, huge, great speeds because you've got kids on this facility. It's shared space. And again, going back to the example of Oulu, where the space is physically removed from the automobiles, I just think that there's so much opportunity for cities and rural environments and places where there are some very, delightful and pleasant and attractors like lakes and places that people want to go and visit. What better way than to have an entire network of connected infrastructure, off-street network infrastructure? And, a lot of people come up and say, well, but the cost is just too extreme. We can't do this. And it's like, it's a drop in the bucket compared to what we spend on, what we were looking at earlier, which is motor vehicle infrastructure. The amount of money that gets sunk into, this type of infrastructure, highway types of infrastructure, those pathways, having a physically separated pathway that kind of parallels this and is off to the side. And I guarantee you the right of way of these highway zones are massive, because they plan on expanding it at some point in time. They always do. And so, it's there, but in the interim, this sort of shared shoulder of being able to, bike to this meaningful destination, this music festival, that's brilliant. And good job to you guys for like coming up with a creative solution to at least be able to get there. And it just warms my heart to hear that so many other people rode their bikes there too.
Yeah, and like in kids and families and older people, right? And it's, having the cones kind of did two jobs. Like it prevented the parking, which is sort of the main job, but also just like psychologically, it's a visible barrier. It's a visible separation, right? Like it just puts into your mind that this is my space, and the cars have the car space, and so it feels as if.
And I want to zoom in on what we're talking about. We're talking about those pylons, those cones right there. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, brilliant.
And you mentioned Oulu again. And the other thing about Oulu is that they don't have a dense building plan, right? Like they're quite a sprawling city. So it's not like they've got this very old fashioned, very dense, ancient European city build. Like they are quite sprawling, not too different from a lot of North American cities. So we talk about how this doesn't work because of sprawl, but obviously there are ways around it, right?
Yeah. Oh, and I do see that we also have another view of those pylons. There we go. Yeah, very, very simple. It did that, but yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Adam. The beauty of Oulu and why I love it so much is because it is sprawling, because the distances are greater than your typical, example from Europe of, this is Utrecht and the distances are really, really, short and there's lots and lots of density there. In Oulu, yes, it's a very, very much a form factor of single family homes, distances that are spread out. But the fact that they did it sort of intelligently and built in that network of pathways to be able to deliver everybody, from the kiddos on up to the elderly, to their meaningful destinations on safe and inviting shared use paths, is just absolutely brilliant. And to your point too, Adam, is that there are some sections that get a little bit more intense, and the potential conflicts between pedestrians and number of cyclists, sort of increase. And in those areas, there's like physically separated, designated space. It's really, really wide, and a portion of it is just for pedestrians and a portion of it is for people on bikes. But then in the more rural environments and through the forest, then it's just sort of shared space. So
amazing. We've got to go visit.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to visit this summer. I was over in Europe for 60 days this year, and I kept communicating with my friends in Oulu, and they tend to take off in the summertime.
Okay.
It's like, they're like, come back in the winter. I'm like, okay.
It's a good idea. I think you should do that.
I know. I think I should. I want to give another plug to your fleet of bikes here, and so this is a nice little shot of some of them. I'm not seeing the trike in this particular image here. So, talk a little bit more about the structure of how the business is kind of situated. You mentioned like a 2-week period that the one person does. Is it done like that? Is it done as like rentals for a chunk of time, or is there a subscription model where people kind of take the bike and they're paying like on a monthly basis and they continue to use the bike?
Yeah, it's completely free, and that it was important that it be completely free. So basically, it's wonderful. The entire thing is done on a volunteer basis. We had a couple of friends that were able to put together the website with us, which was very helpful because we're not very tech savvy. And so we set it up through Bookable, which is a great platform, to be a 2-week period. People could only come on, we picked a Sunday at 12:30 to drop off the bike. And then we had volunteers to help, make sure everything is okay with the bike. We made sure the chains are all oiled, and did a checklist of making sure everything's good, and then pass it on to the next participants. They would arrive around 1:00 on a Sunday afternoon, and we introduced the bikes to them because they had already signed up for them through the website. So we already had people booked up, and that way I could communicate with them. Part of the model is also getting feedback from the participants. We wanted to understand what do you do before you start renting this bike? Do you ever go biking? And we wanted to find out what kind of lives people were living and whether or not this is a very new thing for them. And then after their 2-week session, we would send out a follow-up questionnaire to find out, how did it go? We wanted to collect data so that we can communicate this with various entities like the city of Yellowknife, show them how this is working and how people really do want this. Show it to the Healthy Choices Fund that we got the funding for the bikes from, so that they understand that this is a program worth funding again. And so we do want to do this again next summer, but there are expenses that we have to source. So
right, yeah. Fantastic.
And I mean, we've started going through the data from those questionnaires. We've only sort of just started looking at it, but the thing that jumped out right off the bat was that for the overwhelming number of respondents, it was fun and it was easy. And that was just what we wanted to demonstrate, right? That you can, it's not a big hurdle to make this a part of your lifestyle, and you'll enjoy it, right? Instead of just having to drive across town to get to where you're going, your commute becomes a part of the day that you look forward to. It serves your, like physical needs for activity. It serves your like psychological needs for activity. If you are traveling on things like the Frame Lake Trail, you get to be in the trees along the lake shore, traveling by other people walking and cycling. It does all these services, and you don't just lose that time.
So my question for you guys is, how much did you have to pay all these actors to do this, to stage this?
Yeah.
That's funny.
So yeah, Yellowknife, the entire population of Yellowknife is somewhere north of 20,000. So it's as cities go, it's a pretty small city, and that's the biggest city in the territory.
Wow.
And we had over 100 people in this critical mass, and I mean, we just sort of advertised on Facebook and put up flyers on message boards around towns and things like that. So I mean, that's a pretty big sample for a city of only 20,000, right? Like it's a pretty big representation.
I think it brings up the point that there is such a latent desire and need.
Yeah, and again, it's fun, right? Like it was fun to do. The shift program has sort of gone to sleep now for the winter because we kind of agonized about whether we wanted to continue lending the bikes over the winter time. But in the end, we thought that the road conditions are so bad that we especially because it's encouraging people who are not avid bikers already to give it a try, which means there'll be people that are less experienced and less familiar with the equipment, and the risk of injury was just kind of too high.
We do hope in the future that we could do a winter version as well, and we'll keep that in our back pockets until later.
Yeah. That's what you look like after riding.
For a look like this, you got to give it a try at some point. I mean, this is classic.
Yeah. And I'd like to say,
but so is this. This is classic so right here. Yeah.
There are girls.
Yeah.
And we do have quite a large population of winter bikers, and it's apparent when you go downtown and you see they take a lot of the bike racks away in winter. A lot of the businesses do, which is very frustrating for some of the winter bikers. But then they just end up parking their bikes right on the side of the road next to parking standards and things like that, like light posts and whatnot. So you really do see how many people think that biking in winter is just fine.
Yeah. This story sort of reminds me a little bit too of the experience in Winnipeg. And I interviewed Aaron Riediger, who had a wonderful podcast called the Plain Bicycle Project podcast, and really highlighting the initiative there where they were bringing over these abandoned bikes from the Netherlands. And then they like to say that we're dropping these relaxed upright bikes, just plain bicycles, in on the community there in Winnipeg, and they termed it a culture bomb, of where they're just like, starting to infiltrate in and just gradually change the culture. Because as I mentioned earlier and alluded to earlier, is that it seems like there's a pent-up demand and need for wanting to be able to get around in an alternative way. And you said it there earlier, Adam, it's fun. Who wouldn't want to get around in some other way?
Yeah. I remember talking with the founder, who's I'm sorry, his name escapes me now, but I remember talking to him because that was an approach that we considered. We thought, well, can we get these guys to ship us some of the bicycles that they brought over, or is this a model that we could replicate? And our conclusion was just that by the time they got up here, the cost, the price point we'd have to attach to them it was higher than people were going to be willing to pay for a secondhand bicycle. So that wasn't going to be, appropriate approach. But we still managed to get a slightly more North American version of those bikes in the form of the city bikes that we got. But that whole project was fascinating. It was such a cool story.
Yeah. I'll be sure to include links in the show notes to this episode to Erin's podcast. She did a limited series about the Plain Bicycle Project. And then I interviewed her twice, and also interviewed Patty, the bicycle mayor there in Winnipeg. So that's another upcoming episode that, it's actually going to be out by the time this one gets out. But that's good stuff. Right. What haven't we talked about yet that you want to leave the audience with?
Jeez.
Snow clearing?
Snow clearing. Yeah, I don't know.
So you mentioned snow clearing. We do have a good, I think, photo that kind of looks at that as a bit of a challenge. When we're looking at snow, we mentioned it earlier, in Oulu, the philosophy is you're not really clearing the snow, you're actually texturizing it and you're making it grippy. And you talked a little bit about the conditions that you all are dealing with, but this is the snow clearing photo.
Yeah. So that was this is on a multi-use path, which is again it mostly just looks like a slightly wider sidewalk, and there is a little green sign that says bicycle route. That's the only signage on that whole route that indicates that bicycles are welcome in that space. And furthermore, when you look at it, it's not super clear if the sidewalk is the bicycle route or if the road is the bicycle route. Like, it doesn't say bicycle path, it doesn't say multi-use path. It's really ambiguous. And there's my bicycle standing up in the snow without its kickstand down, because the snow was deep enough that I could just plunk it in there, and it stayed. On this particular stretch of road, one of the big frustrations we have is that when there's a snowfall, they'll come by to grade the snow off to the side of the road, and they tend to grade it up onto the sidewalk. So it's this frustrating little indication of priorities, where they're clearing the snow off of the road for the convenience and safety of the cars, but they're making it less convenient and less safe for the pedestrians and cyclists and all of the kinds of road users. So they've made a choice there about what mode they want to prioritize, and we don't think it's the right choice. And we have one of the frustrations that we have is that, again, they leave the snow on the road. They mostly leave it to cars to kind of squash it flat, and then every once in a while they'll come along with a grader blade and try and sort of smooth it out and push the snow up to the side. And then at the intersections, they tend to dump a lot of gravel so that people have some traction to come to a stop. But curbside parking is ubiquitous all over the city. Most of it's free. Outside of the downtown core, all of the curbside parking is free, and it frustrates the snow clearing efforts, because then the people driving the graders, they can't damage the car, so they have to give them a pretty wide berth when they're clearing the snow, which means that you lose not just the road space where the cars are parked, but you also lose this sort of verge space between where people are actually driving and where the cars are parked, and that would typically be the space taken up by people on bikes. And so that forces the people on bikes further into the road, which is less comfortable, makes people more nervous, and also causes frustration for the drivers. So clearing the snow that way is, it shows where the priority set is. And the city and the territory have made a lot of talk about how they want to find ways to decarbonize and reduce their economic harms and things like that. But we're still sort of continuing these same sort of patterns that are leading people to think that the only viable option for travel around the city is to use a car.
Right. Yeah.
I like how you often coin the term it's overkill.
Yeah, it's overkill. Right.
Typically you said 8 kilometers, but typically your distances are 2 kilometers or a kilometer to get somewhere. But the default is get in my car, go do the thing, and come back again. And it can change if we only had the proper infrastructure to do that.
Well, and we're looking at a few lights in the distance on this particular image here, and you can see, especially since this is technically it's a multi-use path. It's for bikes and peds along the side of this road. You can see that would a person even feel comfortable walking 800 meters? Let alone 2 kilometers. I mean, it gets to the point where you're like, well, what about human dignity and treating people with dignity?
There's a person in our neighborhood who uses an electric wheelchair, and in the wintertime, she rides it just down the middle of the road, because it's not reliably the case that everyone clears their sidewalks in front of their houses, because in our neighborhood, that's not done by the city. That's done by the residents. And I don't even think there's a bylaw that requires it to be done. It's just something, people do because they know it's the correct thing to do. But sometimes people don't get to it for a few days. So that's not reliable. And even if the sidewalks were reliably cleared, snow tends to accumulate at the intersections. So you would come to the end of a block on the sidewalk, and then you have to get across the road to the other side, and it's a big swampy mess of snow ridges and drifts, and so for this individual, the only reliable and safe way for her to conduct in her own neighborhood where she lives is to ride in the middle of the road. And where's the dignity in that?
Yeah, I've got a conflict with the. And I have a problem with the concept of sidewalks and multi-use paths being cleared by the owners of the properties, that facility is in front of, because, it sort of infers that, I'm responsible for clearing the ice on my sidewalk in front of my single family home. Okay, all right, I kind of get that. But there's a lot of assumptions that come up, to that. Technically, that's considered part of the right of way of the mobility network of the city. It's not like you could do whatever you want with that sidewalk. You can't block it off. You can't claim it as your own and do something. You can't build anything on it. It's actually part of the transportation system. It's supposed to be. Likewise, with professional businesses, along this stretch, is it their responsibility to do that? And what about the other areas where it's like, okay, well, who owns this property right here where the sign is? The honest to goodness truth is that it should be the responsibility of the municipalities to clear said, transportation infrastructure. Period. Full stop. Get it done. You have to make sure that you're managing your books in such a way and your budgets in such a way that when you build something, you have the ability to actually maintain that. Whether that's, filling potholes, repairing other, damages, as well as maintaining it so that it is a safe facility. And that's my position on multi-use paths and sidewalks is that. And the reason why it's so important in my mind is that, when you look at something like this is a critical piece of infrastructure. And, in Boulder, Colorado, which I'm very, very familiar with, I lived there for a decade and I go back there every year for a couple of weeks. They make sure that they plow and condition and clear the multi-use pathways before they even turn their attention to the motor vehicle travel lanes. And oftentimes, to your point, Adam, it's like oftentimes the roads are fine just like staying. And they won't actually go in and treat that and plow that until it becomes an issue to do so. But they'll mobilize right away to make sure that, the multi-use paths are in fact passable because it is different. It is the lifeline for these kiddos being able to get to their meaningful destinations, as well as, people in mobility devices like an electric wheelchair. So it is treating people with dignity.
Yeah. And when you're driving and there's snow on the road, you need to drive more slowly and, it can be a little bit frustrating and things can slow down. But you can the kinds of snowfalls we typically get around here, you can probably still get through. But if there's a big dump of snow on the sidewalk and you use some sort of a mobility device, it's probably the case that it's impossible for you to travel. Like you're simply trapped. So yeah, and again, in credit to the city, the Frame Lake Trail has been so well and reliably cleared. That conduit has been fantastic.
That's exactly what we want to see and we need to see. And then that ethic, I think, needs to also apply to some of these more urban environments too.
Well, and the thing is, the problem is getting there, right? So the network has not been expanded outside, right? Like they're not considering is not only does the Frame Lake the trail need to be cleared, but we need to be able to get there. There needs to be a network to get people from their front door there and then on to downtown or wherever they have to go. And one of the things we've been sort of harping on the city about a little bit is that, again, we have these wide roads and we have all this free parking that is pretty underutilized in most neighborhoods because everybody has driveways. So what usually happens is that, there'll be a car on the driveway and a second car on the driveway, and then maybe like a camper sort of on the lawn or on the side next to the driveway. And then that means that someone's got a trailer with a couple of screws or something, or a boat parked on the street. And so and that's not someone going for dinner, right? Like that's long-term parking. And so that means that the city is subsidizing this, someone having a lot of toys, basically. They're not getting any benefit from it. And also there'll be one of those on this side of the road and then another one a little further down the other side. So the space is underutilized, but the city has to maintain it. They have to look after it. They have to fill the potholes. They have to clear the snow. Like when there's sewer maintenance, they have to tear it all up and then repave it afterwards. So it's a big liability, and the city doesn't get any revenue from it, and the residents don't really get a huge benefit from it because if some of that parking was removed, there would still be ample parking in most areas.
Right. Yeah. To close this out, Becca, Give us and the audience a little bit of wisdom about this type of project and just kind of going for it and what that was all about. Any words of wisdom after launching the program?
That's funny. Stay dedicated. If you have an idea that you think is going to make a difference in, a few people's lives, or 20, 40, 50, just do it. There were many points when I had barriers come up and say, "Oh, you can't go from here to there." So don't give up. There's a way to do it. You can figure it out, and the benefits are so high. So I guess that's.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the program absolutely would not have happened without Becca. Like nobody else would have had the determination to make it, because it came together really quickly, right? And yeah, that's you deserve all the credit for that. But also, Becca made it happen because she amassed a group of people that she could rely on. She amassed the volunteers, and she found partners to work with. And, she asked them to participate, and they were willing to do it, right? And it all came down to her ability to stick with putting the program together and then finding partners that she could work with.
Yeah. Having the audacity to give it a go and then get help as fast as possible. And again, the website is ShiftNWT.org. Becca and Adam, thank you so very much for joining me on the Active Towns podcast. This has been an absolute joy and pleasure.
Thanks, John.
Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you all so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this episode with Adam and Becca. And if you did, please, give it a thumbs up. Leave a comment down below and share it with a friend. And if you haven't done so already, be honored to have you subscribe to the channel. Just click on that subscription button down below and ring that notifications bell. Hey, and if you're enjoying this content here on the Active Towns channel, please consider supporting my efforts by becoming an Active Towns ambassador. It's easy to do. Just navigate over to activetowns.org. Click on the support tab at the top of the page. Again, thank you so much for tuning in. I really do appreciate it. And until next time, this is John signing off by wishing you much activity, health, and happiness. Cheers. And again, sending a huge thank you out to all my Active Towns ambassadors supporting the channel on Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, YouTube Super Thanks, as well as making contributions to the nonprofit. Every little bit adds up, and it's much appreciated. Thank you all so much.